Welcome and thanks for participating in GuideOne Insurance's webinar, Church Security, 5 Things You Need to Know. My name is Brian Gleason. I'm a Senior Risk Manager at GuideOne. We know that insurance and risk issues can drain your time, energy, and money. We offer products and services to help you keep your resources focused on your mission. We're talking today about church security ministry best practices, considerations for starting or improving a security program, steps to take if a violent situation occurs. I'll be introducing our speaker in just a moment, but I want to let you know if you have questions during this presentation, please. That is likely on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll answer those at the end. Chinn is an author and nationally recognized expert on church violence. Mr. Chinn's firsthand experience with armed intruder situations make him uniquely qualified to consult on church security matters. In 1996, he was a responder in a standoff with an angry gunman who took hostages that focused on the family. After the trial, he began researching and writing on the subject of criminal and other incidents in North American ministries. Since then, he's begun consulting with churches nationwide regarding risk assessment, construction, design assistance, and security. So, Carl, I'll pass it to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of your busy day to join this webinar. We're going to get right into the heart of it so that we don't waste anybody's time on anything here. So, yes, Brian, I was at Focus on the Family for 10 years. I served there as their building engineer from 1991 through the end of 1999. And in 1995, Focus on the Family paid attention to what was happening around them. And part of that was the Oklahoma City bombing that occurred in April of 1995. So we paid attention, we developed plans, and then in 1996, those plans were tried when that gunman walked in and took hostages. That changed a lot of my mindsets. The need for security in faith-based organizations, and I began studying it at that point and writing about it, researching, and a few years later, after doing a lot of research, began to consult other churches on the need for intentional readiness. One of the churches that listened was my home church, and that was New Life Church in Colorado Springs. Paid attention to what was happening, developed plans, and then 10 years ago this week, those plans were changed. A killer came to New Life, killed 2 people in the parking lot, and then came in the building while he was outside shooting is when our inside team was mobilizing, moving towards the sound of the gunfire, and we were successful in stopping him within a few short feet of coming into New Life Church. And those of you familiar with the story understand that he had posted a suicide diatribe in which he said, "Christian America, this is your Columbine." And when he went down in our hallway, short of his goals of calamity, he had an AR in his left hand, he had a Springfield XD 9mm in his right hand, he had a backpack with 1,400 rounds of ammunition. He was certainly intent on making good of his promise that Christian America, this is your Columbine. But our team did come together, and one of our team members was able to make contact with him and stop him. And since that time, 10 years ago, other churches are paying attention, and other churches are developing plans. And I was asked to put 5 different thoughts together as churches test as those churches put their plans together. These are 5 things you need to know about church security. And let me start off by giving you a statement that readiness is a result of planning. It's not a reaction to surprise. And let's see. For some reason, Abby, I'm not able to change slides. So I guess I'm going to give the control back to Abby and let her try to change the slides. while she's doing that, yep, there it comes. Wonderful. Let's click on it one more time. These are the 5 thoughts that we're going to be talking about today. Your plan must be built on a solid foundation. It's got to be simple. It cannot be a complex plan. For it to be effective, though, it must be sound. And folks, we are a faith-based community, so as such, we need to be social. And then your plan, regardless of what it looks like, it's going to improve with experiences, and we become seasoned. So let's get right into talking about what I mean by solid. Let's go to the next slide. For some reason, the statement went away, but the statement at the front of that is that an effective security program is solid from the start. And what we mean by that is, just like Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 24th and 25th verses, or 24th through the 27th verses, that's where Christ talked about the wise man building his house on a rock. And for it to be solid, it's got to be built on a solid foundation. And that scripture in Matthew, the 7th chapter, talks about the wise man after he's built that house on the rock, and the rains come, and the waters rise, and the winds blow. And I want everybody to understand it's raining. If you haven't taken the time to look outside and look at what's going on around this country, folks, it's raining, and the water is rising. We've got domestic and foreign terrorism. We have an assault going on morality. There's no question about it, but morality is under assault. There's Supreme Court cases as we speak that testify to the fact that our morality is under assault. Bottom line is, what was once quiet sanctuaries have become opportunities for statements of violence. And as such, we identify that there are sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. It's a statement that's been made by many, and it's very true, but I've added another thing to that too. There's also shepherds. And the first thing that I want to speak about is the shepherds, the leaders of the churches, taking responsibility, grasping the concept that we've got to keep our folks safe. And leaders, I know some of you on the phone today are pastors and youth leaders and executive pastors and in leadership of one way or another in the churches. Denial puts your people at risk. Hello? Yes. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. Don't know what that hello was about, but denial puts your people at risk. And I've heard of pastors saying that when their time comes, they're okay to go. Well, that's fine for somebody to say for themselves, but you've got people who are in your congregation that you're responsible for, and you've got to grasp the reality that their safety is up to you. And I want you to ask yourself, what would you do if you're a small church? And the vast majority of our 375,000 congregations across the U.S. are under 100 people on any given Sunday, just like what we just saw in Sutherland Springs, Texas. There were only 50 people in that congregation. I walked around that. I spent the week after it happened down there capturing lessons learned, talking with law enforcement and victim families. And that's a representative of most of the churches throughout the U.S. And as a pastor, you may not even be there when evil walks through your door. But you've got to take it serious. And then once you take it serious and you decide that you're going to do this program, then there comes a transition period where you're going to be handing it off to your security staff. And if your security operator's on the phone today, now we're talking about this baton being handed to you after the executives, the leadership of the ministry have decided they're going to do it. Now it's going to become increasingly something on your plate. And a security ministry never brings attention to itself. It's there about the ministry. It's always committed to the message of that ministry. And there's ways you can express that, even by just the name of your team. And you may even want to try to do a mission statement. I'm going to show you some examples of both of those here in a little bit. And one thing that we've got to keep important front and center is we've got to be legal. That means you've got to be paying attention to your regional and local compliance, your self-defense statutes, and clergy penitent privilege. And this is where we need your participation, pastors and counselors. You've got to be paying attention to mandatory reporting laws and things of this nature. So let's go to the next slide. Here is a good example, and this is right out of my book, Evil Invades Sanctuary, where I talk about a model organizational chart and name for a church safety ministry, as I like to call them. You're going to have your team is probably going to be volunteers. We very specifically chose the name Safety and Ministry because we want people to join that team because of compassion, not out of sensationalism associated with security. We're looking for a very specific mindset. We're looking for people who can support the mission of that ministry. And then when they start building this team, it will truly be a ministry. And there should be a medical side to it. These are the three operating units, if you will. There's a medical side. That's obvious. Technical is your folks that are there Monday through Friday, not on the weekends. I mean, they may be there on the weekends, but these are your custodial, facilities, hospitality staff. They have a responsibility in this as well, because when all the weekend warriors are gone from the security team, they're the ones who are still going to be there. We're going to talk more about that here in a minute. And your protection team. That's your folks who do serve in security. Now let's take a look at a possible, at an example of a mission statement. This mission statement is from a church in California. Let's go to the next slide, Abby. And this mission statement says that this team is there to ensure a safe environment in order to save, equip, send, and support pervasive hope at all, put your church name in there, venues with excellence as our standard. Now, I would almost bet you that that particular church, that pastor is probably well known for using that term that's in italics there, pervasive hope. That ties your team back to your actual ministry. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is just an example of some wording you might want to use. I did work for Focus on the Family for many years and had the opportunity a few times of having direct interface with Dr. Dobson. He's certainly one of the most honorable men I've ever met. And he said this to me once, and I wrote it down, and I've used it many times since. He told me, he said, sometimes when you bring a program to me, you hang so much on the boat, it sinks on launch. And that was a teachable moment for me, and it's a teachable moment that I want to relay on to security providers around the country. Keep it simple. Often when somebody with a security mindset and that security thing in the DNA, they bring a plan in, and first thing right off the bat, it's got $20,000 for a camera system, $15,000 for an access control system. We need new radios that will get us better, et cetera, et cetera. Be careful, folks. When you're starting a plan, try to keep it simple at first. And here's the main thing, is appoint the right people. Every plan has people, parts, and processes. Every security program out there, whether it's military, the Pentagon, or a small church in Louisiana, it's going to have those three things that make up the security program. That's people, parts, and processes. And the wrong people can wreck the best parts and processes. You might have an access control system that FEMA wants to use as a model for other churches. You might have a CCTV surveillance system that somebody from the Border Patrol designed for your church, and it could be the best thing anybody's ever seen. But if you got the wrong people running it, it can be a train wreck. With that in mind, the simplicity and the right people, I want to encourage you to start with what you have where you are. If you're journeying anywhere, I'm a traveler. I have to travel a lot. And when I bring up MapQuest, when I'm in my motel and I'm trying to figure out the way to get to a church and I've got a rental car, you know, what's the first thing you put into your map when you're laying out your journey? It's where you are, where you start from. Your Google Map on your iPhone, whatever it is, you start where you're at. To do that is called a risk assessment or a risk vulnerability analysis. That's how you take a measure of how ready are you now. And there are resources for that. Pastors, when you find somebody to turn your program over to, there's a good chance they may be a member of ASIS. That's the premier security association in the world. It's not focused on faith-based organizations. It's just a general security and law enforcement association. And I happen to serve on the House of Worship subcommittee on that, and we've developed a risk vulnerability analysis for our members that they can tap into. If you're not a member of ASIS, Tina Lewis Rowe, if you Google her, she's got a website where she can send you out a risk vulnerability analysis that you can do yourself. Your local police and fire departments can help you. Now, I want to say something about that. If you get both fire and police there, you may get two different aspects, two different suggestions. Fire department wants you to run for everything. Get out of the building right now, and law enforcement's going to tell you to run, hide, or fight. And you got to be kind of like Paul. Paul said, "Hear all things, hold fast that which is good." Folks, I do statistics on church violence. Since 1999, I evaluated 1,600, almost 1,700 now deadly force incidents of violence at faith-based organizations in the United States. In all that time, I've seen 3 people die a violent death from fire. I want you to think about that. It's just not that often that it happens. It hasn't happened in a school since 1958. A student hasn't died in a school since 1958. So what's that tell us? That tells us that fire protocol is being done well. So don't stop doing fire protocol, but pay attention to what's really happening. Violence is taking a lot of people's lives. You got to pay attention to the violence that's happening and build your plans around that. And so when you get a risk vulnerability survey from police and fire, eat the corn, spit out the rocks. Take the good stuff and the things that aren't applicable to your security program, don't worry about that. Now, as you move through your program and developing it, take the low-hanging fruit. Do the simple things first. Don't develop a manual that's big enough to choke a mule. And always choose simple over complex. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to take you through something that's just real fast. This is one of the simplest things any church can do, and that's taking a look at your outside door hardware. Get your envelope of your building solid so that people can't come in at times that they shouldn't be or at places they shouldn't be. And one way to do that is taking a look at your door hardware. And I know this ain't as fun as me telling you to get down to the range with your AR and your Glock and hear things that go boom. I know there's not near as much fun in this, but the truth of the matter is this is something you got to do. You got to make sure your doors are working. And there's 4 different adjustments on a door. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but that first slide is how strong is the spring. Let's go to the next slide. This slide shows you how much pressure is at the back of that door. When you open it up, some doors, you know, slam into the wall. Some stop just short of that. Now we're going to get to the next two and most important adjustments on the door. Next slide. That's swing speed. That's the majority of the travel of that door. And then the last slide on that series is the latch speed. Those things are going to determine how well that door locks. And if you didn't catch it at the beginning, I was building engineer for Focus on the Family for years. I look at things from a facilities management standpoint still, often. Doors move with the season. Buildings move with the season. A door that might lock really well right now in December, it may operate entirely different next July. So you've got to be intentional about paying attention to your doors. And while we're on this subject, I want to give you an example. A young man at the GuideOne facility in Arvada, just 77 miles north of us here in Colorado Springs, adjusted one of their doors just days before a killer came to their site. And that killer, during his shooting, and he killed 2 people and wounded 2 others, during that attack, he fell outside that very door that had just recently been fixed. And he tried to get back in, and he couldn't. And one of the people who died that day was Philip Krause. That was December 9th, 2007. Philip Krause and Tiffany Johnson were 2 of the facilities at that youth with a mission. It was Philip Krause who fixed that door. I've always felt like Philip Krause saved many lives that day. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Your program has to be sound. And I want to tell you, if you are not training, you are saying it will never happen here. And I want everybody out there to be doing some intentional training based upon the most common and the highest impact risks. I'm going to both extremes of your risk vulnerability analysis here. Do the little things often and well. One of our accomplishments at New Life Church before the killer came was that we were really good at reuniting lost children with their parents. And as part of that activity, we were also good at knowing our parking lot and during major events. And we had an opportunity once during a police funeral, because of the size of New Life, every officer killed in the line of duty, we had their funerals at our church, and those can be very moving ceremonies, as many of you know. And our security team likes to take it up very serious when there's an officer funeral going on inside, because we don't want any law enforcement worrying about any kind of an attack coming on them, although clustered in one space. And one day when we were having one of those funerals, our outside team found a police officer, an older police officer in uniform, just wandering the parking lot. A short conversation with him evidenced that he was having trouble with Alzheimer's. While our team member was engaging him outside, another team member was approached by a frantic policeman inside that said, "We just lost contact with our good friend, our old captain." And we were able to reunite them immediately. And that's just some of the little things that you can do. You do those little things on a continual basis, you get better and better. And you've got to learn to watch for DLRs. Don't look for them. Plan around working on the realistic response continuum. Because when you see something that doesn't look right, then you need to be able to relate to it in a proper way. You train based on the realities. You can do on-the-job training, discussions, drills for those things that you're going to encounter more common than others. For the things that are lower risk, meaning that they're not likely to happen, but if they do, they're high impact, things like an active attack of some sort of another, you've got to train for those as well. And to train for those, look back in order to look forward. That's a term right out of the 9/11 Commission report. They said the whole purpose of that report was to look back in order to look forward. That's what I hope all of you do. Take a look at the realistic things that are happening around. Then develop good policies and procedures. Document those policies and procedures and document your training. I've already talked about training. It's something that you've got to be doing, but you must document that training. And don't ever say that it won't happen here, because that kind of denial will cause your training to be impacted, and you'll be doing training that's never taking into account the possibility of a low likelihood but high impact issue. And again, I'm going to go back to a previous thought. Even though you're working to document everything, keep it short and simple. Now, I want to show you a graph that shows kind of what I call the activities of your team. This next slide is called a lot of things, called a use of force continuum or a response continuum or activities that your people are going to go through. Most of the things you deal with, the vast majority of things you deal with, are going to be down there in the bottom. Observance and friendliness. That's where you're going to spend most of your time as a team. And a lot of that's going to be medical, too. You're going to be dealing with people who've slipped and fell in the parking lot or tripped on a curb or slipped on the ice or whatever the various things happen. But also in the course of a day of serving in security at a church, it's very well possible that you may come across somebody that's being aggressive. And the best thing you can do is study some verbal de-escalation. That's another thing you can drill. And I love to see church teams doing that, drilling on verbal de-escalation, practicing with one another, having somebody that is determined to act like a knucklehead come up to you and go through all the things a knucklehead does. You know, hey, your pastor said some things last week that really made me mad, and I want to talk to him today. Just go through a drill of that kind of thing. As it moves up the continuum, there may be a time where you got to go hands-on. At this point, I'm hoping you've already called for some law enforcement backup. It may not be progressing slow enough for you to do that. But, one of the things when you're planning security or safety, there's always the guy in the back of the room that raises his hand and says, but what do you do in a lightning storm and a fire evacuation? Your answer to that is, it depends. That's the most common answer to any question regarding security. It depends. And when I'm talking about a response continuum here, I'm not saying that you're always going to have the opportunity to observe somebody at first, then see him getting more unruly as time goes along, so you're adding more people and you're going into verbal de-escalation, and then he goes into a mode almost like he says, okay, I'm going to phase 3 now, and you're going to have to put hands on me, and that doesn't work, and he goes to phase 4 and you have to use deadly force. It just doesn't happen that clear cut. It's probably either going to unfold extremely quick, or your whole time is going to be spent down there in observance and friendliness. But let's take a moment and look at the tip of that spear, at those most deadly incidents. And Abby, let's go ahead to the next slide here. As you're planning whatever your responses will be, I hope you're taking a look at the things that have happened in the past. And to do that, I hope you can keep an eye on my website. Abby, can we go to the next slide? There we go. I want you to look back so that you can look forward. And when we talk about that most violent things that happen at churches, many of you have seen my website. I've had many good comments from that, and thank you, by the way. I saw a lot of my friends on the attendee list today. Thank you for being there. And these are things that the statistics over the past several years have shown us. There's 3 main reasons that violence may come through your door. That's robbery, domestic spillover, or personal conflict. For years, those three have consistently been over 50% of the reason why violent attacks happen at churches. And if you're to break that metric down even further, you would find that the majority of people actually murdered, because this is just an overall look at the violent acts. But if you look at the number of people actually murdered at the church, the number one reason most years is domestic spillover. And I got my first call from a reporter within 2 hours after Sutherland Springs happened, and we didn't know anything at that point, and she asked me what I thought would be the trigger, and I told her probably domestic related. A lot of people want to immediately go to that category down there called religious bias, and we have some of that. That does happen, but for years that has been under or around 6%. Pay attention to what's really happening. And when you got somebody going off the rail in a marital situation or a domestic issue of some sort, pay attention to that, folks. That's serious stuff. And Abby, let's bring up the next slide. That's one of the reasons why your pastors need to work so close with your security folks, your pastors and counselors, is you need to know when somebody's been in to talk to them. And sure, there's pastor penitent privilege or priest penitent, or called different things in different states. But there's also a need to let folks know when something's going off the rail and somebody's life is in danger. Now, continuing on with this that Abby just brought up here, we can see that 60% of the violent attacks at churches have been guns. But don't base your entire plan on guns, because take a look there. Over 15% of the time, that violent attack has been a knife or some other stabbing weapon. Nearly 6% of the time, it's an automobile. An automobile is a very serious weapon and used by many, and it can be used by you. You may be in an area where you can't legally carry a firearm in church, and so you've got to think about other things you can do in a violent attack. But again, base your plans upon the realistic things that have happened in the past. Let's go to the next slide. And in this slide, you'll see some other metrics about church violent attacks. And that is, one of the consistent things is it's continually, for the last 10 years, this is only going up. At least 2 to 1 more likely that somebody will die outside your walls than inside your building. And even for those attacks that came inside, many of them started outside. And that's what I base this metric on, is if it happened entirely outside or it just started outside and moved inside, that's what you're seeing there. Right now, we're running at about 74% started outside or went down entirely outside. Only 26.32% happened inside the church or started inside the church and moved out. And another surprising metric is that only about 40% of the time does an attack happen during an event. Remember a while ago when I mentioned that your hospitality people need to be brought into your plan. Through the week, you've got to have folks that have some level of training and some level of awareness for when things are going south and there's no security team around, or there's no protection people around. This is especially critical in smaller churches. Larger churches may have a security force there through the week. Others don't. And I want to tell you something about that. And that is that there are some basic things you can do when it walks through your door. One of the most disturbing comments to come out of Sutherland Springs were the comments from people who said there was nothing we could do. And I want to quote my good friend Dave Grossman. He says, those who say there's nothing that can be done do nothing. Those who say there's nothing that can be done do nothing. I'm not criticizing any victims. I'm just telling you like it is. Truth will set you free, and the truth is there is always something you can do. And number one, you hear, hopefully on the phone today, we have a lot of people with protection in their DNA. When you hear a violent act, you see a violent act, you hear of a violent act, number one thing is you go towards it. That was really the only training we had had at New Life before the killer came, was our director of security had simply told us, you hear gunshots, go towards them. We hadn't gotten into as much training as we needed to. Those of you who sat through my seminars, you've heard me talk about that. Training is vital, but the main thing you do when evil walks through your doors is you meet it face to face. And you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to be committed to that. I have good friends across this country who have been the ones to stop an attacker without firearms. John boasted at the Universalist Unitarian Church in Knoxville. Because of their theology, they wouldn't allow a gun. But John and 3 other men took that killer down when he came in. Jerry Waddell in Emporia, Kansas, is my friend who stopped an attack with a songbook, threw it, hit the guy in the back of the head, and then body slammed him to the ground. These were men who were willing to go towards the sound of gunfire, and they were in it to win it. They were both determined to bring that to an end. Let's go to the next slide. As I looked for comments about what I was trying to say with social, the best comment I found was actually on GuideOne's website that describes what they're about. And they're protecting the people who make a difference in our communities. That's what you're doing, too. On a lower level, you're not a big insurance company, I know, but you're an operator for your team. Now, let's bring up those bullet points associated with this. First of all is your internal community. And when I say internal community, I mean your leadership and your constituency, the people who are sitting in your audience and the people who are running your ministry. You've got to be on a very good working relationship basis with them. You've got to maintain a level of trust with that leadership. And you've got to serve the people well. And unfortunately, that's where we see some problems even occasionally happening with law enforcement circles. If they get overbearing, they lose the support of their constituency, which is their community. As a security operator, you can make the same mistake. You don't try to be the men in black or the secret service of the church. You're there as a servant. You're there to serve the people and to serve Christ. And I want to encourage all of you to always check your spirit and make sure that you're serving those people as well as you can. Max Lucado, the famous author, said, you can't write better than you live. And I want to tell you all, I've borrowed his term there, and I want to tell you, you can't serve better than you live. Get your house in order, and then make sure you're serving those people as well as you can. Listen well. My friend Jimmy Meeks often says that when the pastor is asked by a visitor, who's your people in the church that can best tell me what your church is about, your pastor should say, oh, that'd be my security team. That'd be my safety guys. They love our ministry more than anybody, and they can help you get familiar with it, and you need to meet those guys. That's the DNA of an effective safety team. You want to be the friendliest folks at your church. And then there's your external community. What I mean by that is your neighbors right down the street and your region. And beyond the neighbors down the street and the region is national. You've got to be paying attention to what's happening on a national basis. And then even international. If you're doing missions overseas, you need to be familiar with other people who are doing missions in the same area you are. And work together. Be a part of anything that's a joint effort in that area. More and more towns are seeing coalitions spring up, and that's one of the things that we must do, folks. In your town, you've got to start pulling together a group of people meeting together from different theologies. And please, if you get a chance, go to my website this week where I've talked about what it's like to work with your community. And I encourage everybody to be a part of a network locally and hopefully beyond local. And related to that, be social with your support community. That's your police, fire, and medical, your first responders. Make sure those folks know you very well. Make sure that if your church has Wi-Fi and quiet places and coffee pots, make sure your police officers know that. Give them a place they can come in, do paperwork, and get onto your Wi-Fi. Give them your passwords. Get to know your police officers. Get to know your other critical relationships, insurance, media, attorney, your building inspectors. Be on a first-name basis with all of those folks, because an incident is no place to hand out business cards. You want to know your community of first responders and authorities having jurisdiction. You want to know them really well up front. You want to be on first-name basis with every one of them, and you want to know the faiths down the street from you of different faiths. You want to know them all. And let's go on to the next slide here. As you work with all of these things, you will become seasoned. You'll learn from every mistake you've made. You'll learn from experiences. And one of my favorite writers is C.S. Lewis, and I love this quote of his. He said, "Experience, that most brutal of teachers, but you learn, my God, do you learn." That's what you're going to do when you set out to start doing safety. You're going to do some things wrong. I'll tell you that right up front. You're going to make some mistakes. And you learn from those mistakes, and you move on. You'll discover that when it comes through your door, it's going to look different than you thought it might. When our gunman came to focus on the family on May 2nd, 1996, we discussed big yellow Ryder trucks a lot. We thought we were ready for just about anything, but it didn't look at all like Oklahoma City when it went down in our lobby. And as you experience things, you'll learn more how to respond to the next one. And I always tell people that security planning is a little like jazz. And here's what I mean by that. Jazz is a type of music where a talented leader starts off with a rhythm and other talented players join in. And an orchestra is where everything is choreographed from one specific place. And he tells the drummer when to lower the tone, and he tells the trombone when to come up, and the singers when to hit a crescendo. That's not how it is in security operations or in law enforcement. You're playing things as they happen, and the goal is to come together with a rhythm that's going to put you back on track. With every incident, you're going to improve with every time you touch this. And one of the funny things I always like to include is Will Rogers and others who said good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that from bad judgment. And related to that, I want to remind all of you that when you've served twice, you've already got more experiences than most churches in America. And one of the things that occurred to us after our shooting at Blue Light, I was praying at home one night, about everything that was happening. And yeah, we stopped it from being really violent, but I wish we could have done more. And one of the things that really occurred to me was Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. That's exactly how we ended our situation at New Life 10 years ago. We recognized that the Lord had brought us through most of that. Yes, we had a horse prepared. Yes, you will have a horse prepared. And but I want you to always understand that Nehemiah said in Nehemiah, the 4th chapter, the 9th verse, we prayed to our God and posted a guard. Folks, you can't do this without prayer. First and foremost, I hope everybody has already been praying. And now I'm begging you to post a guard, but never stop praying. And one last thought on being seasoned. Noah only built one ark. And when the waters rose, it was seaworthy. And I want to repeat what I said in the first slide. The water's rising, folks. With that, I'm going to end the presentation, and we'll move into the questions and answers. So if I can have my other panelists unmute their phones, and hopefully I can have a little assistance in answering some of the questions that are coming up for us.
Absolutely, Carl. Great. Thank you so much for this helpful information. We do have a number of questions. The most common one is, will the slides and presentation be available afterwards? Absolutely. We will be sending the slides, copy of the presentation and everything to everyone who registered for this presentation. That should be coming out in the coming days. We'll package that up for you and send that to you. So you'll be getting that in your email. Carl, a number of people have asked if you would kind of spell out for us what your website is, where it is, so they can do some research there.
Wow, I guess I didn't have that anywhere in the slide, did I? Okay, good question. It's just my name.com. It's CarlChinn, 2 N's, .com. www.carlchinn.com.
Great. And I know there's some valuable resources there that our participants will make use of. You mentioned a DLR in your presentation. Can you elaborate on exactly what DLR stands for and what that is?
Sure. One of the best and most seasoned trainers in the country is my friend Chuck Chadwick in Dallas, Texas, northern Texas area. And I have looked hard to find anybody who coined the phrase before Chuck, and I think he's the one to be credited with coining the phrase DLR. It means don't look right. So you see something that don't look right, that's a DLR. And there's a series of statements in law enforcement circles that says when you see something that you think is suspicious, you do this. You ask the right questions. If you get the wrong answers, you make the right decision. So the first thing is identifying what doesn't look right. And we could spend all day on the things that don't look right. But you see a DLR, then you take the appropriate action.
Great. A number of people have asked what the date range is for that data that you've collected. Is that over a year or two, or I imagine it's a much longer period of time?
It is. I started doing the data collection January 1st of 1999. People have asked me why did I start then? Because I was writing the book. And at first I wanted just data to put into the book. And the internet was coming of age then, and I'd learned this new search tool, and I started searching for news articles. And I didn't spend a lot of time going back beyond when I started my investigation. I just started it on January 1st, 1999, And the statistics that I publish go back to that time.
Great. Somebody has asked, we know there's a lot of involvement from both people inside and outside the congregation. Somebody was asking, we've broken it down, and that person who doesn't fit, that DLR, is it more often come from inside the church? I would imagine with domestic disputes and things like that, or is it more often from people who have no specific connection to the church?
Most often somebody who has no specific connection to the church. That said, as I recall, and I can't remember my own statistics as well as some of my friends do, but as I recall, about 25% of the most violent attacks occurred from somebody associated with the church. Member, former member, relative of a member, staff member, pastor. There's been more pastors kill people in their own church than there have been terrorist attacks since 1999. So again, when I say look back to look forward, now I'm not saying everybody out there go back and do a background check on your pastor tomorrow. Please don't take this the wrong direction. But I'm saying that about 25% of the most violent attacks come from within.
There are a number of questions around the issue of, do we hire off-duty police officers? Do you recommend arming security? And then, of course, all the implications behind that about concealed carry and things like that.
Sure.
What are your recommendations?
If you're a church that can afford it and you have the resources, I recommend using law enforcement as much as possible. If you've got off-duty officers who are in your congregation, that is a wonderful resource and should be used. But like I said several slides ago, the overwhelming majority of churches across this country are under 100 members in any given service. They simply do not have the resources to hire or the experience sitting in their congregation. Do not let that stop you from getting intentional about security. And at the same time, I want to say this: don't make it about guns. This plea with churches that I've been involved in for years, going across the country, asking churches to get ready for the rising water. I never make it about guns. It's about intentional security. Now, I personally believe that a firearm in the hands of a responsible defender is the best tool to protect people when there's a firearm in the hands of a killer. There's no bones about that. But use that carefully. Don't just go in and say, because of my Second Amendment rights, and I'm a Second Amendment rights believer just as much as anybody, but don't make this about guns. Please, folks, don't make it about guns.
Right. We have several questions about training and, how often should that occur? When should that occur? How many people should we involve? I would imagine some of that varies based on the right. It's based on the church involved and what the threats are.
And the other demographics. As you can imagine, when I worked at Focus on the Family while Dr. Dobson was there, he was a lightning rod for certain people groups who disagreed with his message. And so if you've got a pastor or a ministry that's very well known to be a lightning rod, that may change how many people you have on your team. And one of the things that you'll see if you go to my website is I've also launched a nonprofit called the Faith-Based Security Network. One of the things that it's going to do is benchmarking. It's going to answer some of those questions. What's the normal size team for a particular type of church or size of church? and we're trying to pull together those demographics from different areas so that we have some models to look at to be able to answer that question more specifically.
Great. I have questions about large bags and boxes coming into church. You know, I don't know that we necessarily want to go like the stadiums have where everything has to come in a clear bag, but you know, are there concerns about that?
Yes, there are. And one of the things I tell people is if you're going to restrict backpacks, you got to think about that pretty serious, because that's going to involve diaper bags and Bible bags and oxygen bottles and everything else you can imagine. So you got to go through that process pretty carefully. Here's the models that I see work best. For one thing, churches should have a threat level established for every day, just like our Pentagon planners and military bases, they have a threat level. I would recommend that you implement at least 2, maybe 3 threat levels, yellow, orange, and red, whatever you want to call them. And the only time you would ever restrict backpacks and boxes is when they're at a level 3 or red level. So I encourage teams to develop threat levels, and to do that, you got to have a threat intelligence operation of some sort.
I have a couple of questions on, I know when we've discussed in the past, and it was some of our GuideOne materials, when we talk about the possibility of having armed individuals in your congregation, part of that comes with the philosophy that you don't put a weapon in the hands of even a trained security team member without dealing with the fact that essentially what you're asking them to do is to use deadly force to stop someone else from getting harmed. Can you talk us through how to help the pastors and others understand that philosophy and kind of talk through that issue?
Sure. And I've written on that a few times, and if anybody writes me, and my contact information is on my website, and asked me for a document that I developed on guns and security, I'll gladly send that to you. But the bottom line is that, yes, you want people who are responsible defenders. And one of the things I tell folks in my book and in that document that I've written is I don't even hunt with people that I don't know how well they handle a firearm. I'm a big-time hunter. I do a lot of hunting, always have my whole life. I don't hunt with somebody that I don't know how they handle a firearm. How much more important is that in a congregation? You want to be very certain of the people who are carrying. And there's always the issue of having a designated team that you know about, and then people that you don't know about who are just armed congregants in the seats. And I always tell folks, you don't know who's armed out there. You can have all the policies you want, but you very well may have visitors even out there who are first-time visitors, and they don't know what your policies are. So you've always got to assume as a team that there's somebody in your audience who's going to be an overzealous friendly and try to jump in. And don't just be so callous to say you're going to get killed. That's not a good viewpoint. You've got to train your people just like law enforcement does. They have to continually train on whether they're coming up against the good guys or the bad guys.
Perfect. I got a question from someone who's, having trouble recruiting members in their church who just don't see the need for it. How do you recruit those? And then is there an ideal number of people that should have available on any given Sunday, at your church service? I would imagine that, again, depends on the church size and layout and things, but are there some guidelines that would help inform that decision?
Let me answer the second one of those first. And besides the previous answer that's still applicable of it depends, and, the related state-based security network is trying to develop some of those models. Let me say this. if you've only got 2 people on your team, one of those people needs to be outside. Beyond that, I'm not going to give you ratios today. As we develop what some of those ratios are that are being used in other circles, we'll get better at answering those questions as a collective group of professionals throughout the United States. We'll have some benchmarks up there that will disclose that. So we'll get better at that as time goes along. But for right now, I want to just say if we've got 2 people, put one of them outside. And there was a second part to that question, and I apologize, I forgot the second part.
Not a problem. The question is really about how do we influence others in the congregation about the need for safety ministry. It says this congregation doesn't see the need for an organized ministry and doesn't want to be involved.
Well, again, I want to go right back to the very first thing. It's the pastor's decision. It's the executive wing and the board of directors. It's their decision. If you're a sheepdog and you're trying to get this built in your church, you've got to develop your elevator speech, your 2-minute spiel that you would give your pastor or a senior board member as you're walking across the parking lot, and you get that opportunity for 2 minutes. You work on what is drawing at your heart about needing security in the church, and then you relay that to them in such a way that you hope they catch it, because it's got to come from the executive wing. My friend Grossman, Dave Grossman, is absolutely right when he says the majority of our population are sheep. They've never hurt anybody, they will never hurt anybody, and they've never been hurt, and they don't understand the concept of a sheepdog. He's right on the money on that, and that's the type of people sitting in your audience. A church-wide announcement is rarely a good thing. I've seen it work very few times, and the few times that it has worked, it has never talked about firearms or any kind of lethal force training that the team does. It focuses on safety of the children and evacuations and things of that nature. I simply do not go for church-wide announcements. I rarely see them work well.
Kind of piggybacking on that, we've got a question about, is it helpful to have some kind of training for the congregation as a whole, not just a specific security response team, but congregation as a whole? Is there useful training that they can present to their congregation?
Well, first of all, that's a demographic issue, and I would go back to my general duty question. Response is it depends. If you're a church of 50 congregants, you might be able to spend a little time one day talking about that. If you're a church of 14, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, no, that's not going to work. And here's that's a great segue into a request that I have. And here it is. Here's my request to churches across the country. You have a youth group that you're developing into the leaders of tomorrow. You're focused on that youth group. Will you take one youth meeting a year and bring a police officer in and let him address those youth about not being a victim, about doing things that are safe, that are going to keep them safe, about walking to their car and being aware of the cars around their car in a shopping lot parking center, and not just walking up to it with their keys dangling and on their text and oblivious to things around it. Bring in law enforcement once a year and teach your youth how to stay safe. When your youth are safe, they'll convince mom and dad. I'm just a big believer in focusing on youth in that arena. Start there and let the parents hear it from the kids.
It sounds like great advice. I have one more question related to the medical issues that you talked about. Do you recommend having trained medical personnel, and if so, how do you equip them and screen them, and how do you handle that medical response piece?
Well, there again, the bigger the church, the better resources you have. And I always encourage, when it comes to medical, relying on their existing certifications. If you can, don't try to come up with your own certification program. However, if you don't have RNs and EMTs and firefighters and people who are already certified in all of those things, then you can take some of your folks inside your small congregation and get them a American Heart Association certification for CPR and first aid, adult first aid and child first aid. Start with some of those little things. Another great thing, and this is the question I forgot a while ago that's also applicable here. Somebody said a while ago, how do you recruit people? Every community in the United States has a CERT program, CERT, Community Emergency Response Training. It's managed, I believe, at the county level throughout the United States. And the Sheriff's Department most often is the party responsible for that. Sometimes it goes to the Fire Department. Put on a CERT program and invite people from their church to go to that CERT training. And from that group of people, you'll get folks who may be interested in serving on your team, and you'll also get some level of free certification for medical folks.
Sounds like great advice. I know the folks in our neighborhood are always looking for good locations to host their CERT classes. So
that's right.
Having
you
one
can host
at
them
your
at
church.
your church. That's right.
Yep. They love opportunities like that. Well, I want to thank you so much for this presentation this morning. I know it's been helpful to all of us. You want to repeat just one more time your website and then the information about the Faith-Based Security Network, just so folks have that.
All right. Thank you very much. The website is www.carlchinn.com. And the new association that I've put together is called the Faith-Based Security Network. And it focuses on 5 services. That's peer-to-peer connectivity, benchmarking, best practices and resources, threat intelligence, and public policy, or swaying legislative issues.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Like I mentioned, the recording will be available soon. You'll get that in an email form. We very much appreciate you participating with us. Great questions. We'll also be consolidating those questions in a format for you and make them available. Please feel free to contact us with more questions. We very much appreciate you.